She moved $43,000 out of their joint savings account on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday noon, he had lost 3 business partners in the span of 4 hours. The 43rd call he received that day was not from a partner, it was from his own attorney. 7 words delivered without warmth. They are saying, "You cannot manage your house." That sentence landed somewhere behind his sternum and did not move for days. The question it raised was not whether the words were fair. The question was whether, after 6 years of building something enormous together, he had ever once looked at the woman beside him and truly seen her. What follows is the account of what it cost him to find out he had not. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? His name, in the world that knew him, was Kang Seo-jin, 41 years old. 14 years inside an industry where trust was currency and currency was everything, the private logistics and bonded warehouse sector that quietly moved things of value between the people who had them and the people who needed them, never drawing attention, never appearing in a headline, always appearing on a balance sheet. He had built his firm, Jeongum Consolidated, from a single leased dock space and 2 employees into a 14-floor operation with holdings in 4 port cities, relationships with 31 institutional clients, and a reputation that had exactly one texture: reliable. If Seo-jun said a thing would be done, the thing was done. If he said a figure was accurate, the figure was accurate. That reputation was not an accident. It had been assembled over 5,000 days with the same care a jeweler uses on a setting, each facet deliberate, each angle checked. He was, by every measure his industry used, a person of consequence. The woman he was engaged to marry was named Yoon Myra, 36 years old. She had come into his life not through the circles he navigated, but adjacently, through a mediation conference where she had been engaged as a compliance translator for a neutral third-party firm. He had watched her work for 90 minutes across a long glass table. She had taken no unnecessary notes. She had asked 2 questions, both of which reorganized the room's understanding of the central dispute. At the close of the session, she had produced a single-page summary that contained, he later counted, exactly 11 sentences. Every sentence was load-bearing. He had found that so unusual that he had asked the conference coordinator for her firm's contact details before he left the building. Every sentence was load-bearing. He had found that so unusual that he had asked the conference coordinator for her firm's contact details before he left the building. They had been together for 3 years before he proposed engage for 2 more. 5 years of partnership before the engagement, which brought the total to 5 years together and 2 engaged, 6 years in sum, which in his world was not romance so much as due diligence, an extended review period after which he had concluded that Yoon Mi-rae was, in every category that mattered, the most precise and principled person he had ever known. He had never told her that directly. That omission would become important. The joint account had been his idea, proposed 14 months earlier as a practical arrangement for shared household expenses and the upcoming wedding costs. The arrangement had a combined ceiling of $120,000, seated equally from both of them. He had contributed $60,000. She had contributed $60,000. The remaining balance after 14 months of household withdrawals sat at $91,400 the morning she transferred $43,000 to her sister. He did not learn of the transfer immediately. He learned of it the following morning, a Thursday, when he was reviewing a routine account summary over the first cup of coffee he would finish that day. He saw the number. He read the description line. He read it again. Beneficiary, Park, So-yeon. Memo, Unni gift, wedding. The amount was $43,000. He sat with that for 31 seconds, which he counted without knowing he was counting. Then he set the cup down, slowly enough that it made no sound, and he called her. She answered on the second ring. "Mi-rae, yes, There is a transfer from the joint account, 43,000 to your sister. A pause. Not the pause of someone caught. The pause of someone who had expected this conversation and was deciding how to enter it. Yes, she said, for the wedding venue deposit and the catering. So, Jan's account couldn't hold the full deposit without triggering a reporting flag on her end. I moved it through ours. You moved $43,000 out of our account without telling me. I told you 3 weeks ago that the venue deposit would be significant. You said, and I'm quoting you, that you trusted my judgment on family expenses. He did remember saying that. He also remembered the context, which was that he had been finishing a call with one of his port directors when she had approached the subject, and he had answered her with the efficient half-attention he used when he needed a conversation to resolve quickly so he could return to what he was managing. He had not asked her to tell him the number. He had assumed the number would be modest. 43,000 is not a family expense, he said. 43,000 is a liability. Another pause, shorter this time. Then we should talk when you're home tonight, she said. He agreed. He did not come home until past 11. She was awake, reading, the apartment lit in the particular amber of the lamp she preferred, a small, low-wattage thing she had brought from her previous apartment, and which he had always found slightly inadequate. She looked up when he entered. He sat across from her, and they had a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and that resolved, on the surface, with an agreement to set clear thresholds for account withdrawals going forward. What did not resolve was the thing underneath it, the tone he had used on the phone, and the lateness of his return, and the fact that he had spoken to her as though she were a subordinate who had made an unauthorized disbursement. He did not notice the thing underneath it. He noticed and filed and moved on. That was the 31st of October. By the 15th of November, the joint account showed a second transfer. This one was $15,300. Beneficiary Park So-yeon, memo, Ani gift, remainder, dress, and florals. He saw it on the 16th, a Saturday, and the feeling that moved through him was not concern. It was a kind of hardening, a recalibration. He had been clear, he believed, about thresholds. She had proceeded anyway. The total now given to her sister's wedding was $58,300. $58,300 that had moved out of their shared account and into a wedding that was not theirs, without, in his reading of events, adequate prior consultation. He called her from his office where he was working on a Saturday because 3 of his port contracts were up for renewal simultaneously, and the margin pressure was not polite enough to respect weekends. The call lasted 6 minutes. He told her they needed to discuss the account. She said she was at the market and asked if they could talk in the evening. He said he would rather resolve it now. She said, Seo-jun, I am buying vegetables. The account is fine. I will explain tonight, he said, without fully hearing his own tone. When you make decisions of this size without me, it makes us look unstable. There was a silence on the line. Then she said, I see. Just that. He did not ask what she meant by it. He went back to his contracts. He would spend a long time later measuring the distance between what he had said and what he had meant and what she had heard in the gap. The following Monday, 2 things happened. The first was that Yoon Mi-rae did not come home. Not in the evening, not through the night. By 9 the next morning, a Tuesday, Seo-jun had called her mobile 11 times and received no answer. He had texted 4 times. He had called her office number and been told by a receptionist with practiced neutrality that Ms. Yoon was taking a personal leave that had been filed the previous Friday. The previous Friday, which meant she had filed it before the Saturday call. That was the first thing. The second thing was a message waiting for him on the kitchen table, folded once. An open fold, as though she had wanted to be sure. He could find it without difficulty. It said, in her handwriting, which was precise and unhurried, I have gone somewhere quiet for a while. There are things I need you to understand before I can continue. You will find what you need to find. I trust you are still capable of paying attention. This is not a threat. It is a request. 9 sentences. He counted them. He stood at the kitchen table for a long time after reading them, the fold of the paper still in his hands, the morning light coming through the east-facing window in the flat. Even way it did in November, no warmth in it, just illumination. He was not frightened yet. He was something closer to annoyed. That was his first mistake of the day. There would be others. He arrived at Changam Consolidated's headquarters at 8:40, and by 9:15, his assistant had relayed 3 messages that had come in the previous evening, after hours, routed through his senior partner's separate lines. The first was from Chairman Bay of the Ilson Partners Consortium. The second was from Director Huang of the Namgyo Freight Exchange. The third was from a woman named Jung Sua, who was the compliance director for the most significant of his 31 institutional clients, a state-affiliated bonded storage authority whose annual contract represented in net terms 22% of Chungam's total operating revenue. All 3 messages used different language. All 3 messages said the same thing. They were pausing their engagement with Changam Consolidated pending clarity on an unspecified internal situation. They were professional. They were brief. They were, each of them, severed at the root. By noon, he had received 7 more such notices. By 2 in the afternoon, 13. By 4 o'clock, when his attorney, a sharp, unhurried man named Cho Byung-han, who had handled Chongam's affairs for 9 years, and who did not call unless something required calling about, reached him on his direct line, the count was 17 partners and clients who had signaled a pause or withdrawal. Cho Byung-han said, "They are saying you cannot manage your house." 7 words. It was at this point that Seojin's irritation began to shift into something colder and more attentive. He sat in his office, which occupied the northeast corner of the 14th floor, and which had been designed at considerable expense to project the exact qualities he wanted projected: order, permanence, weight. The dark wood of the desk, the city visible through the full-length glass behind him, the port infrastructure visible at the horizon on clear days, the cranes standing at precise intervals like punctuation. He had chosen this office deliberately. He had curated every element of its surface. He sat in it now and felt, for the first time that day, that the surface was exactly what it was: a surface. He said to Cho, "What are they hearing?" Cho said, "That your household finances are being moved without your knowledge or authorization. That someone with access to your shared accounts is dispersing significant sums in ways that suggest either your oversight is compromised or your relationship with your accounts is not what you represent it to be." $58,000, Seojin said, to her sister's wedding. "I understand what the money was for," Cho said. "That is not what is being communicated to the market. What is being communicated is the inference that you don't control your own house. In this industry, Seojin, you know what that inference costs." He knew. He had watched other operators collapse, not on the mechanics of failure, but on the perception of instability. The industry ran on confidence, and confidence was another word for the belief that the person across the table was exactly who they appeared to be in all directions, not just in the boardroom. 17 withdrawals in one day. By the following morning, the count would reach 23. He had spent 14 years building a thing that could be perceived as unsteady in 24 hours. He sat with that. He did not yet understand that the erosion had not originated from Myre's transfers. He did not yet understand where it had actually come from. He would need to follow a trail to get there. And the trail had been laid for him by the one person he had not been paying attention to. The note on the kitchen table had said, "You will find what you need to find." He was beginning to understand that this was not a comfort. It was an instruction. Weeks earlier, before any of this, before the second transfer and the Saturday call and the word I see, he would have described his relationship with Yoon Mi-rae in language that sounded, from the outside, like affection. He would have said she was brilliant. He would have said she was precise. He would have said he trusted her completely. What he would not have said, because he had never examined it closely enough to see it, was that he trusted her the way a person trusts the load-bearing walls of a house they have lived in for years without ever opening a single wall to look at the structure. The trust was real. It was also entirely unexamined. She had come into his professional life quietly. In the year after they began seeing each other, she had, on 3 separate occasions, offered observations about situations he was navigating that had turned out to be not merely correct, but structurally important. The first was a reading of a counterparty's behavior that he had initially dismissed, then verified, then acted on, saving a contract worth $11 million. The second was a question she had asked about a due diligence report, almost offhandedly, over dinner, that led him to discover an undisclosed encumbrance on an asset he was about to acquire. The third was a 3-sentence note she had left on his desk, after reading a document he had left out carelessly, pointing to a clause that his 2-person legal team had overlooked. He had thanked her for each of these. He had not, on any of the 3 occasions, paused to understand what they meant collectively. They meant that the person he was planning to share life with had a quality of attention that was in his industry extraordinarily rare and systematically undervalued by him. He had been too busy performing authority to study what she was actually doing. The morning he decided to follow the trail, it was a Wednesday. 6 days since her note. 23 partner withdrawals. The sun was doing nothing useful, flat white through a sky that could not decide whether to rain. He stood in her home office, which she used for her own compliance consulting work, and he looked at it with new eyes, meaning he looked at it with the eyes of someone who was finally paying attention. It was ordered in the way only her spaces were ordered, which was not the order of someone who wanted to project organization, but the order of someone for whom disorganization was simply not a natural state. The desk was clear. The bookshelves were arranged by the logic she used, which was not alphabetical and not by color, but by the way she accessed things, most used, nearest, least used, far, an architecture built entirely on her own patterns of thought. On the desk was a single envelope, his name on it in her handwriting. Underneath his name, a number, 1 of 5. He opened it. Inside was a card. On the card was an address in the Yongsan district, a business name he did not recognize, and a time 10 in the morning, and a date, which was that morning below the time and date. In smaller script, ask for Chairman Park Dae-won. He will be expecting you. He has the second envelope. He arrived at the Yongsan address at 9:53. It was a private document authentication firm, modest in the way that genuine institutions are modest, the entrance clean and unpretentious, no signage beyond a brushed metal plate with the firm name. The receptionist directed him without hesitation to a small conference room where an older man, perhaps 70, with the unhurried bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where precision mattered, was sitting with a glass of water and 2 envelopes on the table. Chairman Park Dae-won said, "You are 6 minutes early." She said, "You might be." She said that when something finally mattered enough to you, you would arrive early. Seo-jun said nothing. The older man studied him for a moment with the fair, cold attention of someone conducting an appraisal. "She came to me 3 months ago," Park said. "She asked me to verify and authenticate a set of documents on her behalf, under seal, and to hold them until you came to retrieve them. I agreed, because I have known Mi-rae since she was 24 years old and working her first compliance posting. In 22 years, I have never seen her be careless with anything, including," he said, "the people she loves." He slid the second envelope across the table. Then he slid a separate folder. Slim, sealed with a red authentication band. "The folder is not yours to open yet," he said. "It goes with you to the third stop. You'll find that address in the second envelope. She wanted you to see each piece in order." Seo-jun picked up both items. "Is she all right?" he asked. Park said, "She is rested. She is clearer than I have seen her in some time. That is all I'm going to say." He was on the street again by 10:22. He stood in the cold November air, holding a sealed authentication folder and reading the second envelope's contents. The address was in Mapo. The name on the card was not a person, but a firm, the Seung-won Arbitration and Mediation Archive. He was to ask for Ms. Lim Chae-rin, principal archivist. She was expecting him between noon and 2. He had 2 hours. He spent them walking. This was something he almost never did, walking without destination or purpose, but he found that his body would not consent to a car. He moved through the streets of Yongsan and toward the river without a map, letting the city's geometry do what city geometry does when you stop directing it. He thought about what he was doing. He was following instructions. He was being guided through a sequence, step by step, on terms that were not his. The woman he had chosen was not running from him. She was teaching him. That distinction had a weight he felt fully only as he stood above. The Han River, the water the color of pewter, under the white sky, a barge moving on it, with enormous, unhurried purpose. She had planned this before the Saturday call. She had filed her leave before he had spoken to her the way he had spoken to her, which meant she had known before the call what the call would be, which meant she had been watching a pattern, not reacting to an event. He stood above the river and thought, "She has been watching me for 6 years with the same quality of attention she brought to that mediation table, and I missed it. I looked at her, and I saw someone I trusted, and I called that love. I did not see what she was actually doing." He was 41 years old. He had built an empire of logistics. He had never once thought seriously about the word attention as something he owed anyone. There it was. The word he would carry for the rest of what was coming? Attention. He arrived at the Seongwon archive at 12:40. Ms. Lim Chae-rin was a woman of perhaps 50, precise and direct, who greeted him with professional courtesy and no warmth, the kind of greeting that communicated, "I know who you are and I have formed a view." She brought him to a small reading room. She placed in front of him the third envelope, another sealed folder, this one thicker, and a pair of white archive gloves. "She asked me to tell you one thing before you open anything, Miss," Lim said. She said, "He will look for the place in the documents where he becomes the subject. Tell him to slow down at that point. The temptation will be to skim. He should not skim." She left him with the materials and closed the door. He opened the third envelope first. The card inside said, "What you are about to see in the folder is not about me. It is about someone inside your organization who has been working against you for 18 months. I found it the way I find most things, by paying attention to what was sitting in plain view and being systematically ignored. The person who has been managing your perception problem is not a stranger and not an enemy. He is the person you trust most. Read carefully." He set the card down. He picked up the thick sealed folder and broke the authentication band and opened it. What was inside was 47 pages. It had the look of something assembled with the patience of a person who knew that evidence, to be irrefutable, had to be both comprehensive and sequenced. Bank routing records with annotations, communication logs printed, with specific timestamps circled in fine ink. A chain of intermediary transfers between accounts he did not recognize, annotated with registry numbers that he did recognize, because they belonged to 2 of his own inactive subsidiary entities. Cross-referenced against those entries were dates. The dates mapped against a timeline of events he knew well, because they were events in Cheonggam's own corporate history, the renegotiation of the Namgyo contract. The dismissal of a mid-level freight director who had later lodged a whistleblower complaint that Seojun had dismissed as vexatious. The quiet restructuring of the Ilson partners' relationship 3 quarters ago. He was reading for 11 minutes before he understood what he was looking at. He was reading for 22 minutes before he found the name. The name was Oh Taiwan. Oh Taiwan, who was 44 years old and had been Chonggum Consolidated's chief operating officer for 8 years, who was the most trusted person in Seojun's professional life, who had in the previous 18 months systematically been routing a portion of Chonggum's dormant subsidiary revenues through intermediary accounts, and simultaneously feeding curated perception-damaging information to select institutional contacts, positioning himself as the stable, reliable alternative to an increasingly unstable principal, who had, in the previous 2 weeks, been the person placing the calls that had generated the 17 withdrawals in 1 day, who had called Seojun himself 3 days ago, warm and concerned, to express his worry about the partner departures and to offer to personally manage the relationship calls. He had thanked Taiwan for the offer. He had said, with the ease of a person who had never had cause to look at a load-bearing wall, "I don't know what I'd do without you." He put the folder down and placed his hands flat on the reading room table. Lim returned when he pressed the call button. He said, "How long did it take her to build this?" She said, "She told me she noticed the first irregularity 18 months ago. She spent 4 months verifying before she committed anything to paper. The document you have was completed in final form 10 weeks ago. She has been waiting for the right moment to surface it. The right moment in her calculation was when you would be ready to receive it." And she timed it to her sister's wedding, he said. "I could not speak to her calculations," Miss Lim said. "I can tell you that she said something to me when she delivered the materials. She said, I could give him this evidence on a clear day and he would file it as a gift and move on. He needs to be in the room where the walls are falling before he understands what was holding them up." He sat in that sentence for a long time. The 4th envelope was in a city 4 hours south by car. He drove himself, which was also something he almost never did. The drive was long and flat, and the sky did not change, and he let the road do what roads do, provide a forward direction and remove the option of standing still. He arrived in Gyeongju at 7 in the evening. The address was a small traditional residence near the old royal tomb park, the kind of house that existed in deliberate contrast to the glass and steel of the cities he inhabited. The person waiting there was a man named Ryu Jaemin, 63 years old, who had been one of the founding mediators of the Industry Council that had set the ethical standards for the bonded storage sector 15 years ago. He was widely regarded as the moral authority in the space, not because he sought that reputation, but because he had spent decades refusing compromises that would have profited him. He knew Myre, it turned out, from her early career. He had supervised her second compliance posting. He told Seojun, the recommendation letter that had secured her first senior position. He handed Seojun the 4th envelope and the 4th sealed folder. Then he said, "Before you open those, I want to ask you one question. In 6 years, did you ever ask her what she was most afraid of losing?" Seojun said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "No." "Did you ever ask her what she was most proud of having built?" he said. "No," Ryu nodded, not with judgment, with the quiet acknowledgement of a person who already knew the answer and had needed him to say it in his own voice. "She is not a person who needs to be celebrated," Ryu said. "She is a person who needs to be witnessed. There is a difference. You provided her with the first. You did not provide her with the second." He opened the 4th envelope. The card said, "I want you to understand why I moved the money, not the mechanics. You know the mechanics. The reason So Yeon is 29 years old. She has spent her adult life managing a quietly abusive dynamic with a partner who controls every financial resource available to her. The wedding is not a celebration, it is a transition. The venue deposit and the wedding costs were the price of her ability to have this event on terms she chose at a scale that belonged to her, without asking him for anything. I moved $58,300 because it was the amount required to give my sister one day that was entirely her own. I made the decision without reviewing it with you because I knew, from the way you had been half listening to me for months, that you would ask me to minimize it. I could not minimize it. If this damages us, I need to know, because it means what I have been quietly afraid of is true, that you manage me the same way you manage everything, as an asset to be optimized, rather than a person to be known. He read that twice. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He would keep it there for weeks. The fourth folder contained the operational component, a set of regulatory filings, cross-jurisdictional complaint documents, and a formal notification package addressed to the Industry Council's Ethics Board, already prepared, signed by Myre as a compliance professional, ready to be submitted. A cover note in her handwriting said, "I have built this to be activated. I have not activated it. I am giving you the choice. If you want to address what Taiwan has done through proper institutional channels, these documents are ready. If you submit them, the process will take approximately 6 weeks. The outcome will not be quiet, but it will be correct. There is a fifth stop. The fifth stop is where I am." He submitted the regulatory filings the following morning from his phone, sitting in the car outside the Gyeongju residence in the dark, the submission confirmation appearing on his screen at 6:43 in the morning. Then he called Cho Byung-hun. Cho answered on the third ring. "I need you fully engaged starting now," Seo-jun said. "I am forwarding you a set of authenticated documents that establish a pattern of internal diversion and orchestrated reputational interference. The principal is O Taiwan. The documentation was built by Myre over 18 months. It is complete. I need you to review it and tell me what I have to do in the next 72 hours. A pause on the line. Then Cho said, "Myre built this." Yes, another pause. Shorter. "Send me everything," Cho said. "I'll have a response in 90 minutes. Cho called back in 72 minutes. He said the documentation is exceptional. She anticipated the likely response pathways and closed 3 of them preemptively. This is not amateur work. This is 14 months of professional-grade evidence management. "I know," Seo-jun said. Seo-jun. "She did this while running her own business and managing your household and planning a wedding and being, by your own prior account, underutilized in every conversation that mattered." "I know," he said. "All right," Cho said. "Then let's talk about the next 72 hours. There were complications in those hours, and they came faster than orderly. O Taiwan, who had not yet been formally confronted, received some signal, perhaps the regulatory submission, triggering an automated notice to a compliance contact he monitored, and moved not toward the exit, but toward the center. He presented himself at Chingam's headquarters on Thursday morning with a prepared board agenda, calling an emergency session on the grounds of principal instability, citing the partner withdrawals as evidence of leadership failure. He claimed, the support of 4 of the 7 board members. Seo-jun received this information at 9 in the morning from his assistant, who delivered it with the careful neutrality of someone who did not know which way the current was running. He sat with it for 2 minutes. Then he called each of the 4 board members Taiwan claimed personally from his mobile, one after another 20-minute calls. Not the calls of someone performing authority, but the calls of someone who was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely and precisely honest. He said to each of them what they needed to hear, which was not reassurance, but fact. He acknowledged what he had missed. He told them what the documentation showed. He told them what had been filed. He told them that the question of his competence was fair and that he was answering it, not managing it. The first call produced a conditional agreement to pause the emergency session. The second produced the same. The third produced a longer conversation in which a board member named Director Yoon Cheol-hee, who had known Seo-jun for 9 years and who had 3 times in those years seen him dismiss counsel from people who deserved better, said, Seo-jun, I will hold my vote, but I want you to understand that the reason I am holding it is not because you made a good case just now. It is because this is the first call in 9 years where I felt I was talking to you and not to your presentation of yourself. He said, I understand. She said, do you? He said, I am beginning to. The fourth board member was not reachable. He left a message. He moved on. Oh, Tae-won, without board majority, attempted to convene the emergency session anyway on the grounds of urgency. 3 board members attended. Without quorum, it was procedurally void. His legal basis dissolved. He spent 4 hours inside the Chingam building attempting to manage contacts who were no longer responding with the warmth they had shown him in recent weeks, because the regulatory filing had reached the Industry Council's ethics board overnight, and 2 of those contacts had already received preliminary inquiries. By 3 in the afternoon on Thursday, Taiwan was located by Seo-jun's discreet investigator, a careful man named Han Youngmin, who worked external only and left no footprint at a hotel in the Gangnam district. He was alone. He had checked in that morning. He had taken a suite, which Han reported with a flatness that communicated everything about the quality of the optimism that had booked it. Seo-jun made one more call. Not to Tae-won directly. To the Industry Council's General Secretary, a woman named Director Maeng Ji-yeon, whom he had known for a decade and who was responsible for enforcing the formal process now underway. He told her the individual was in no condition to destroy further evidence, and that voluntary cooperation had not been solicited. He asked her whether the process benefited from containment. She said it did. He provided Han's monitoring coordinates and said, I am not asking for anything informal. I am asking that the formal process proceed without interference. The documentation will hold. She said, I have reviewed the preliminary package. The documentation will hold. He did not go to the hotel. He let the process do what processes built on evidence do. The 5th envelope's address was a small seaside residence in the Tongyang Coast region, 11 hours from Seoul by the road he chose, which was not the fast road, but the one that went through smaller places and gave him time to prepare for arriving at something he could not arrange in advance and could not manage through presentation. He arrived on a Friday evening in late November. The light was doing what coastal November light does. At 6 in the evening, pulling back across the water in long horizontal bars, the sea below them dark and specific, the kind of dark that does not suggest emptiness but depth. He sat in the car for 4 minutes. Then he went to the door. She answered it herself. She looked, as Park Dae-won had said, rested. She looked like the version of herself that existed when no one was performing in front of her, and she did not have to manage the gap between what she observed and what she was permitted to say. She looked, he thought, entirely like herself. She looked at him with the same quality of attention she had brought to that mediation table nearly 7 years ago. You're here, she said. I found what you needed me to find, he said. She opened the door wider. He came in. The residence was small and spare. A kitchen visible from the entrance, a low table, the lamp she preferred, which she had, apparently, brought with her. The same small, low wattage, amber light. He had always found it slightly inadequate. Standing in the doorway of a place she had chosen for herself, he saw that it was not inadequate. It was precise. It was exactly as much light as she needed. They sat at the low table. The sound of the sea was present but not intrusive. He did not know how to start, so he started at the beginning. I spoke to you the way I speak to things I manage, he said. I have been doing it for a long time, and I told myself it was efficiency. It was not efficiency. It was not seeing you. She was quiet. The money, he said. I understand the money now. I understand what it was for and what it cost you that I didn't ask. I am sorry I didn't ask. She said, I know you're sorry. I have known you would be sorry since the moment I filed my leave. That is not what I need to know. What do you need to know? I need to know if you understand the difference between what you did and why it mattered. You managed me. You allocated half your attention to conversations that deserved all of it. You made decisions about what I was saying before I finished saying it. You treated my competence as a resource and my presence as an arrangement. I need to know if you understand what that cost, not what it cost Cheongam, what it cost me. He said, yes. She waited. He said, you spent 6 years next to someone who was too busy being watched to actually look. You noticed everything. You protected things I hadn't even registered were at risk. You built a 14-month evidentiary case in the space between the moments I gave you, and you did it to protect something you didn't owe protecting. And you had to become invisible to the person you were protecting it for in order to do it. I understand what that costs. I am sorry I made that the condition. She was quiet for a moment. The sea was doing its patient thing outside. The amber light held them both. Then she said, Taiwan? The process is underway. The documentation is in institutional hands. Cho is managing the legal dimension. The ethics board received the filing 2 days ago. It will not be quiet, but it will be correct. Your words. She nodded. I want to ask you something, he said. The wedding. So, Yeon. She is all right, Myri said. The transition is done. She has what she needed. The $58,300. She looked at him directly. Was enough, she said. Exactly enough, he said. I know. I'm not asking about the amount. I'm asking whether you knew, when you decided, that it might cost us everything. Whether you made that calculation and decided it was worth it. A pause. Not the pause of someone who didn't know the answer. The pause of someone who was deciding whether the person asking had earned the full answer. She said, yes, I made that calculation. I decided that if a decision made from principle cost me a relationship, that would punish me for it. The relationship was already costing me more than it knew. He sat with that for a long time. Then he said, I would like to build something different from what we had. Not rebuild it. Build something new that has the things the old thing was missing. I understand if you need time to determine whether that is possible. I understand if you need evidence of a different kind than what I have offered in the past. I am prepared to provide that evidence over whatever duration you set. I am not asking you to decide tonight. She looked at him with the full, careful attention she brought to everything that mattered. She said, 6 months. I want 6 months of a different kind of conversation. Not performance, not management, actual attention. At the end of 6 months, we decide whether what we are building is worth continuing. He said, yes. She said, I mean it as a condition, not as a courtesy. If I find in month 3 or month 5 that nothing has actually changed, I will say so, and we will stop. I am not offering this as sentiment. I understand. Good, she said. There is food. You look like you have not eaten properly in 5 days. He said 4. She stood up. The amber light moved across the room. The sea was dark and specific outside, doing what deep things do, holding without displaying. He sat at the table and thought about the word attention. He thought about what it would mean to apply it, genuinely and continuously, to a person rather than a performance. He thought about the 11-sentence summary she had produced at a mediation table 11 years ago, every sentence load-bearing, and how he had been moved by it then, and how he had spent the years after that finding her competence useful, without ever asking what it cost her to maintain it beside someone who didn't fully see it. Attention, he thought, not arrangement, not management, not trust. Administered from a distance. Attention. The week after he returned to Seoul, the formal proceedings produced their first substantial result. The Industry Council's Ethics Board issued a preliminary finding that suspended Oh Tae-won from any representation or advisory role, pending investigation. 3 of the 17 partners who had withdrawn sent notices of renewed engagement. 6 others indicated willingness to return upon process conclusion. 1. The Namjo Freight Exchange sent a private message through Director Hwang's assistant that said, without elaboration, "We appreciate how this was handled." He understood that to mean they appreciated that it had been handled through proper channels and without spectacle, which was the only way in that industry that reputation could be genuinely reclaimed. The board emergency session had dissolved on its own procedural insufficiency. 2 of the 4 board members Taiwan had called Seojin personally within the week to state their positions. He listened to each of them fully and thanked them without managing the conversation toward any particular conclusion, which was, he recognized, not something he would have done 4 weeks earlier. Director Yoon Cheol-hee called on a Thursday afternoon and said, "The board is stable. The council process is clean. I want to say something not as a board member, but as someone who has known you for 9 years. Go ahead," he said. "The person who built the documentation you submitted. She is the kind of person who makes things work without anyone knowing she is the reason they work. In this industry and outside of it, that person is rare. I would not treat the next 6 months as a trial period to be managed. I would treat it as an opportunity to catch up on 6 years of insufficient attention." He said, "I'm learning the difference." She said, "Good. It's not a difficult concept. It only feels difficult because it requires you to be less interesting to yourself." He said, 7 words. She said, "What?" He said, "Nothing. Thank you, Director Yoon." There was one more public moment. 3 weeks after his return from Tangyang, the Industry Council held its annual review forum, attended by the full scope of institutional members, partners, and observers. It was the kind of arena where reputations were curated and language was chosen for durability. He had attended this forum for 14 consecutive years. He had always spoken, at some point, with the easy authority of someone who had nothing to account for. This year, when his moment came in the open remarks session, he said the following. He had not rehearsed it. He said, "I want to correct something in the public record of this organization." Over the past several years, a number of initiatives, risk assessments, and protective actions that benefited Shingam Consolidated and through our operations, the clients and partners in this room were made possible by the judgment and preparation of my colleague and partner Yoon Mi-rae. I did not name her contribution at the time it was occurring. I did not see it clearly enough to name it. It is accurate, specific, and professionally material to state for this record that Cheongam's integrity over that period was protected not by me, but by her, in work she conducted without recognition and without any obligation to conduct it. I am correcting that now because the correction is owed, not because it is useful to me. He stopped. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when something unscripted has been said, and the air needs a moment to adjust. Then he sat down. He looked at no one in particular. He was not performing. He was, for perhaps the first time in a room like that, simply present. The 6 months would pass. They would not pass smoothly or simply. There were conversations that were hard to have and several where he had to stop managing the shape of his answers and simply tell the truth of what he had felt and what he had missed and what he was still learning to see. There were evenings when she said things that were precise and difficult, and that landed in him like stones dropped into deep water, the sound of impact small and the displacement enormous and ongoing. There were also evenings that were quiet in the particular way of 2 people who are genuinely paying attention to the same space and do not feel the need to fill it. At the end of the 6 months, she said, "I think we should continue." She did not say it as forgiveness. She did not say it as celebration. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, as a plain declarative, a conclusion reached through careful observation and stated without ornamentation. He said yes. She said it will require from both of us continued attention, the kind that does not assume it knows in advance what is worth noticing. He said, I know. She said, you are getting better at it. Coming from her, and from everything he now understood about the weight of her attention, that sentence was not small. It was not a comfort offered to ease the room. It was an assessment. It was perhaps the most precisely earned thing anyone had ever said to him. He sat with it in the amber light. The city was outside, enormous and continuing, the cranes at the port standing at their precise intervals, the world of consequence and transaction ongoing and indifferent. In here the light was low and exact, and the person across from him was paying attention with the quality that had always defined her, not pre-deciding what mattered, watching what was actually there. He was trying, genuinely and imperfectly, to do the same. That was where it rested. Not triumph, not restoration. Beginning. The difficult, daily, precise thing. That is not arrangement and not management, and is not trust administered from a distance. The thing that asks you to be less interesting to yourself. The thing whose name, when you finally stop confusing it with its substitutes, is simply attention.